Thank you for inviting me. That's number one. Number two, you said you wanted to tell me who you were. I know who you are. I know who all of you are. I work for you in Washington. I take your concerns back and I try to do the best job that I can for not only the people who supported me, but even the people who didn't, because my job is to represent the people of Connecticut. My campaign is going to be the work that I've done and letting that speak for me. That's what I plan to spend the next 7 months doing. Listening to people, talking to people, telling them what I've done, telling them what I've tried to do, making sure that my vision is aligned with your values. It's interesting because there's a lot of talk about the campaign and the campaign cycle and what that means and what it's going to look like. I can tell you with fidelity, nothing about the way that I'm going to do this work is going to change from what I've done in the last 3 years. My race, Connecticut 5, this district, as you probably know because you're the Democrats, you're the people that pay attention. You're that small percentage of people who look at not just the policy of this, but the politics. Connecticut 5 is a frontline seat. It always has been, which means that it is always on a target list. It's a seat that can flip one way or the other. It's been held by a Democrat for quite some time, but based on registrations, this district is only about 30% Democrat registrations, mostly unaffiliated voters. This district is 41 towns, which includes, Waterbury, Danbury, New Britain, Meriden, but also Cornwall, Salisbury, Norfolk, the Farmington Valley, so very different communities, very different needs, very different interests, and as a representative, I have to make sure that I have a message that resonates through all of those communities, that everybody feels touched and represented. And the way I do that is by sticking to the issues. By sticking to the issues. There is a lot going on at the state level, at the local level, and nationally that is penetrating and polluting our discourse. So you have to have deliberate intentionality to stay steadfast and immovable. And I can tell you when I wake up every morning and I'm getting a tweet from the Connecticut GOP at me, or a tweet from the NRCC or the RNC, I'm like, these people need hobbies. I promise you, I don't wake up in the morning and at 7:02, the first thing I think about is tweeting at Republicans or even at Democrats. I look at my husband and I say, good morning, beautiful. So I pray about it a lot. I try to use my words, have a discerning temperament. I try to listen to people even that when they disagree with my work to hear, okay, well, let me try to figure out how I can meet you in the middle. How I can make sure that you feel like I'm also representing you. I will tell you that for as much as I would like for that to happen in every conversation, there are some hard lines there. At the point where, I can see the conversations bubbling up that I fear are going to be top of mind in this election cycle, where it is really going to be a sense of tribalism, and I'm not going to subscribe to that either. So I wanted to have this as more of a dialogue because it's been a long time since I've been here. We've been in the same room, been able to talk to each other, so I'm very excited to be here. We've done a lot of work at the national level that one of the things people always say is Democrats need a more cohesive message, which is absolutely true. Part of the challenge is when you've done so much, you got a lot to talk about. If all we did was infrastructure, you would hear every elected official talking every day about the future of infrastructure and what that means. But between, the rescue plan and, bless you, excuse me, bless you, and, restaurant revitalization funds, and, all of these things that we've had to do, the national, the international issues, COVID, the pandemic, there's so much work that we've done, so it's really difficult to say, this is our singular message, these are the 3 things we're going to talk about, because different people have different needs in different communities. I can tell you that one of the things that really has become the center of many of these conversations is closing these equity gaps in our community, whether it be in healthcare, in education, in housing, whatever it is, in a way that is uncomfortable. We are having these conversations that people are like, well, I didn't really know it was this bad, but I also don't really know how to engage or talk about these things. And what I'm concerned about is during those times, there's this natural inclination to recede from the conversation. And that cannot happen, because then the loudest, the most onerous, the most cantankerous people take up all the space and all the oxygen in the room. So we have to have a way, figure out a way to have civil discourse that is, when I talk to people, I say, I try to center my remarks and my work around the policy, not the politics, because you guys are so much better than me. I've said this before, I was always a Democrat. I thought I was a pretty good Democrat, but now that I am in this world, I was a mediocre Democrat. I wasn't coming to meetings, I wasn't canvassing, I was an all right Democrat. I voted, and part of that was because I was a high school teacher, so my personal beliefs had to be measured. It wasn't my job to make kids think, feel, believe what I did. It was my job to teach them how to think and then give them all the information to critically analyze, to pull out primary sources, to fact check things. So my role was very different. And it's funny because in 2018 when I decided to run, kids were like, wait, you're a Democrat? And part of the reason for that was I worked in Waterbury, urban public school district, and kids would come in and have all these comments that they were bringing in from home, repeating what their families were saying and talking about, and I would always challenge them to back it up with facts. So many of these kids came, from families with, strong Democratic backgrounds, and I was always forcing them to either defend that argument or tell me why they were dismissing, the alternative viewpoint, which happened. So kids just thought that I was this diehard Republican, and I was person. No. What I was trying to do was give you all the information. But as a representative, what I've learned is we cannot only advocate for, care about, amplify our voices on the issues that we care about. If we are not using our agency and our advocacy to speak up for the people who have no voice, for the most, and no matter who that group happens to be, because it's a moving target. One day it might be, the immigrant community or the Jewish community or the, seniors. One day it might be, the school districts. But it's a moving target, so we have to just kind of center ourselves and our work around saying, how about we just do what's right because it's what we're supposed to do? And when we don't get it right, come back to the table and try to keep working on it until we come up with a different resolution or a compromise. Well, Jahana Hayes votes with Nancy Pelosi. Which didn't work in 2020. I'm not really sure. It's not a winning strategy, but I just want to talk about that for a little bit. First of all, what you probably should know is that Nancy Pelosi doesn't vote on every vote. She's the Speaker of the House. She sets the calendar. She gives a final vote on landmark legislation, but she doesn't cast a vote for every issue. But more importantly, instead of looking at voting percentages, I would challenge them at any point to say, she voted for this and we disagree with it. There is no specificity on what these votes mean. So I'll tell you about some of the things I voted for. I voted to cap the price of insulin at $35 a month. I voted for the American Rescue Plan to bring $5 billion in COVID relief back to this state for testing, for payroll protection, for restaurant revitalization with zero Republican support. I voted for the infrastructure bill, where only 13 Republicans voted on it, and I went to some of my friends who are Republicans and I said, you mean to tell me your district doesn't need any of this infrastructure money? How is it possible that you live in these United States of America and you mean to tell me you don't need a sidewalk, a bridge, nothing? And that, it was fascinating to me because in 2018 that was the number one issue. That was the thing that we were all supposed to come together and get done. So the fact that we finally got this bill, this landmark piece of legislation, and only 13 Republicans could bring themselves to vote for it. I voted to honor the Capitol Police and to pay our National Guardsmen who secured the Capitol for all of those months. When I think about this idea that she voted with Nancy Pelosi 95% of the time, talk to me about what I voted for. And if you have an issue with something I voted for, let's talk about that. But it is a fear-mongering tactic, and it has not worked, and it's not something that I'm going to engage in. I don't want this to sound like I'm taking it for granted, but I don't have to be on the defense because the offense is so good. Like, we've done so much work that all I have to do is talk about the work we've done, talk about the historic legislation that we've passed, what it's going to mean specifically for this state. I was going through some of my paperwork. One of the things that was the holdup in the American Rescue Plan was we wanted to make sure we got state and local funding so that it didn't just go, federal funds came to the state, but also at the local level. Because there are things at the local level that the people in the community know more than the Speaker of the House would know, or even the governor. I'll also tell you one more thing that I'm so incredibly proud of, because it's not something that I thought I'd be doing in Congress. I went to Congress as a teacher. I wanted to be on the Committee of Education and Labor. It is my life's work. It is something that I'm so incredibly passionate about, because I know the only reason I'm here, and I've said this before, education saved my life. And that is not a metaphor, that is not hyperbole. When I look at the people who grew up in the same housing projects that I grew up in, who are dead or in jail or on drugs or just have just crushed by life, I am so grateful for the teachers, for the counselors, for the after-school programs, for all the people who said, just stay here. Just show up here every Tuesday and Thursday for art class or music class, and it gave me a reprieve until I could stand on my own, until I could breathe on my own. So education is so important to me, to make sure we are preparing the next generation of workforce so that young people are self-sufficient and can be contributors in society, so that they have the skills that they need, absent their background. So that is something that I really just cared so deeply about. But my second committee is the Committee of Agriculture. And people said to me, are you sure this is the committee you want? You're from Connecticut. A black girl from the city in Connecticut, this is the Committee of Agriculture. And I said, no, I understand this committee, because you have to choose your committee. I said, but on the Committee of Agriculture, in the back of my mind, people couldn't understand why I wanted to be on the committee that deals with the Farm Bill and foreign trade and all these things surrounding agriculture. I know that this was also the committee that dealt with food security. And hungry kids don't learn. I can tell you that. I don't care what other factors you're talking about. When you've had a 4-day weekend and a kid has his head on their desk by fourth period, generally it's because they haven't had a good meal in 4 days. So when I asked for this committee, it was intentional, because there's no one from New England, mostly Midwestern corporate farmers who represent large rural agricultural districts. So they're thinking about the farming side of agriculture, but not the through line of where that food ends up and what it means to the people in our communities. And I think we saw that more than anything during COVID, when we saw long lines of luxury cars lined up for the first time in their life at food banks, to get food boxes. We saw people who had never experienced food insecurity for the first time in their life struggling with what that means. We see skyrocketing prices right now in grocery stores because we only have 4 meat processing plants in this entire country. So this idea of, yes, the seed goes in the ground and it's planted and it's harvested, but where does it go? We have to make sure that we have people who are advocating for the people at the end of that continuum. In my second term in Congress, I'm now the chairperson of that committee, which have legislation to address college hunger. You would have no idea about the utilization of food banks on college campuses. So I went there with a very linear set of issues and ideas that I thought I would work on, and then by listening to the people that I represent, by listening to you, all of these other things have become my issues as well. I am a leading voice on conservation issues and what that means moving forward. I think we're going to, again, this is going to be an area we're going to have some difficult conversations where we have to decide how are we going to address today's crisis. You know, with rising inflation and rising gas prices, there's this natural inclination to pump more gas or, you know, diesel. And it's like, actually, this is the time where we should be becoming more energy independent, not the other way. You know, there's this natural inclination when there's all these conversations about affordable housing and what that looks like. And I really have to, you know, have some of my colleagues pump the brakes because I live in a district that has some of the most beautiful conservation lands and open spaces in the country. So there has to be a healthy balance there. I'm going to say this, but you got to let me get to the end. You got to let me get to the end of my statement because I don't want you to be like, well, what are we working this hard for this girl for? I used to say that teaching is the only job that I ever loved that loved me back. I can tell you in Congress, I like it, but I don't love it. But I feel so just good about the work that I've been able to do when people call my office and they have an issue, and for me to really be able to connect them with the federal resources. And I'm not in love with it the way I was with teaching. And I don't, like, I'm still working with it, but I know that I need to be here right now. Like, I know with everything that's going on, I feel so accomplished and fulfilled and just proud of the work that we've done, because much of the legislation that is on the floor right now in this Congress are things that were aspirational in the 116. You know, these are the things that when we passed the American Rescue Plan with the largest investment in public education that we've made in 100 years in this country, I was like, I've been telling you guys this. Like, you need to repair the HVAC, you need to have the physical structure, you need to train more teachers, you need counselors and nurses on the ground in the building. So I cried when we passed it because I was like, it took a pandemic for everyone to kind of look to the left, look to the right, and say, oh wait, things are not as rosy as I thought they were. I read in the paper, is she running, is she not running? I'm definitely running. I have work left to do. I plan to be here in the next Congress to finish what we started, but I hate when people say, you know, talk about politicians as if it's a dirty word. Because even though I didn't grow up saying, you know what, one day I want to be a congresswoman, I can tell you that there are so many young people who do, who are in middle school, and they would tell, Ms. Hayes, I want to be a senator when I grow up. So if we are presenting this narrative that once you are an elected official, everything about that is bad. No, we have a government, we have people who represent us. And part of that, you know, includes mobilization and work and discourse and disagreements, but it is the process by which we stand. Our democracy is in peril. These are real issues. These are real issues, and when people say, I don't want to talk about that, you know, let's move on. I don't know how you move on from that. I really don't. And I like, it's weird because it has become such a contentious topic, but I can tell you on January 6th, I was in my office. I brought my son down to DC because I wanted him to see the certification of an election, because it's not something that happens in every Congress. And I am just fascinated by the institution. I know that this office doesn't belong to me. It is the office of. You know, I have so much respect for the office of. I was in my office, and it was about 1 o'clock, and they started the certification of the election. So every state has to call out, and this is what people saw on TV. And then it was clear that something was wrong because they swept the speaker out, and then the Steny Hoyer, the Secret Service came in and moved them. And you learn quick, when they move, you move. Like, we're good. You know, I was in Boston at an event a couple weeks ago, and the fire alarm went off, and Nancy Pelosi was across the room, and I was like watching her because I was like, we're good until she moves. There's 57 people outside, and their only job is to make sure she's safe. So she's still sitting, we're okay. But I'm in my office, and my son started asking, Mom, what's going on? And I said, what do you mean, nothing? I didn't want to scare him. We're getting texts, we're getting updates. Everyone went back to their office and closed the doors. And his friends were texting because they were watching on TV. And then it got to the point where you could hear out the window. People were climbing up the building, and you could hear out the window. And he's like, Mom. So they told us, turn off the lights, turn off, your TVs, everything, close the shades. So for like 9 hours, we're in the office on the floor, putting the sofa up against the door. You could hear people in the hall, like getting louder and louder and closer. So we're trying to be as quiet as we can so that no one knows that anyone's in the office. And I'm looking around, and all I have, there was like a hand cart that you move boxes with. So I pull it out of the closet, and I'm like, okay, I guess I got a hand cart. I don't know. There's nothing else there. I think people take for granted that the capital of the United States is fortified because it's the capital of the United States, but this was something that no one had ever anticipated. There's so many things that happened that day. I took all these notes, I was writing all day, but the thing that I think really made it real for me and made this work that much more important, we got a call, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, because we were like, can we leave, what's going on? We're just waiting for any updates. It's 9 hours in the dark on the floor, and it said, the House is going back in session. And I was like, why are we doing this? This is crazy. It's not safe. Have they secured the campus? So the whole Capitol complex is connected by underground tunnels, so you can get to anywhere. So we're going through the tunnels, and there's broken glass, the pictures are down on the wall, National Guard, police are laying on the ground, you saw helicopters are swirling, and I'm like, why are we going back in session? And we got on the floor, and all the members are there, and everybody had the same sentiment, like, is this safe? Is this okay? And Nancy Pelosi came down the center aisle. And she got in the chair, and she banged the gavel as loud as I've ever heard her bang the gavel. And there was just such a sense of, this is what leadership looks like. So when people question why she did that, every member of Congress, the American people needed to see that night, because I can tell you the whole walk to the Capitol, I was like, this is crazy. Why are we doing this? And after she banged the gavel and told them to resume the count, I said, she's doing this because our democracy matters, and we cannot let these people win and change the outcome.
Yes.
If that is not important enough for us to keep fighting for, like, I can't even describe to you that feeling that I felt that night. Because it went from anger to sadness to fear to this sense of defiance. Like, no, you cannot have this country. And when we were leaving that night, we left, we went out the stairs outside, I looked back, and it still gives me chills because the dome lights up, and it's 4:30 in the morning, and all of this has happened, and police are everywhere, and helicopters are swarming, but the Capitol was still lit up. In that moment, we had good leadership and a great outcome. And I think that's what we have to think about. I think that in this country, in any healthy democracy, you have opposing political viewpoints. We need dissenting viewpoints. I don't want everybody to be a Democrat. There should be some dialogue and discussion about other people's values, other people's beliefs. But at the point where we can't do that in a reasonable way, at the point where we can't even acknowledge that this is a problem and we need to make sure it happens again, then we need to keep Democrats in charge for just a little bit longer. It's so easy to compartmentalize things and only deal with what's happening today. But if we don't make sure that we address what happened yesterday and put steps in place to make sure it never happens again, then we have a problem. We have a problem. I have colleagues who still, won't say that January 6th was a problem. So if there was any time to be a good Democrat, now's the time.
I think you talked about this already. This was my question before I came here. When I was in high school, my favorite class was civics. We don't teach civics anymore. And along with the hate fever. It's like, okay, civics education?
Actually, we do teach civics. In Connecticut, it's a graduation requirement. Connecticut, not every state, but in the state of Connecticut, in order to graduate high school, you have to have a civics course. What I think would be equally as beneficial as making all students have civics as a graduation requirement is making all students have service as a graduation requirement. Because it's one thing, it's one thing to know the purpose of government and how all of these things work and what it means. It's another thing to see how those things impact our community. I would say to my students, Dr. Martin Luther King used to say, a quote about, you can have a brilliant mind, you can be the smartest scientist, ever. But what are you going to use that for? To build a nuclear bomb or to find a cure for cancer? So kids have to have, not just kids, but everybody has to have a purpose for their action. So it's not enough to just be civically engaged or know that I'm the congresswoman and this is where I work and there's 435 of us and these are the branches of government. But why is this work important? I think is equally as important. Nothing is too difficult for someone to understand if your intent is to help them understand. I have an amazing delegation. Our Connecticut delegation is one of the best delegations in the Congress. We get so much done. We accomplish so much. Every member has a gavel. But I can tell you, when we get on a call and we talk several times a week, there are many things that I pose to the group, and they're good Democrats who do good work, have progressive values, but there are things that they've never had to think about because they've never had to think about it. So when we're on these calls and we're in a room like, guys, did you ever think about this? Or, I know what you're trying to say, but let me share with you how that might be perceived by this group of people. And we always come back to the middle and make sure that we are centering our conversations. To say that that doesn't have value, it is not as simple as, and it fascinates me because people always say, why do people always make a big deal about you being a black woman? I was Irish more times this year than I've been in my whole life. 5 parades, 3 breakfasts, 2 Zoos. And I was so proud to celebrate Irish heritage alongside all of these people who were just excited to teach me about all the things and all the traditions. And it was fascinating to me that no one ever accused me of having identity politics for saying today I'm Irish. I say that in a lighthearted way, but think about that. That's crazy. This idea that you have to diminish your own light in order to make someone else's shine brighter. This is not a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean that by lifting up one group, we are pushing down another. We have to make sure that we are moving forward together, that we are acknowledging all voices, that we are speaking up for the people with no one else to speak for them. And sometimes that person will be you, and sometimes it won't be you. Sometimes that issue will be your issue, and sometimes it'll be an issue that you never ever thought about, never wanted to get involved in, really wasn't concerned with, and now it is up to you because you're the last man standing and the only one in the room where this happened, and you have a unique opportunity to speak up about it. I'm never going to recede from that. Because I know the only reason that I'm here is because someone spoke up for me. And that someone was always a different person in a different room at different times in my life. Someone thought that there was enough value in me to say, no, let me give her a shot. I'm going to give her this job. I'm going to give her a ride. Whatever. And I feel like that's who we are, and the fact that people want us to defend that just feels as un-American as it can be,
I'm Carrie Strauss. I'm a retired teacher from Ridgefield, Connecticut, and I taught for many years. Little ones, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and 4th little ones, and 1st grade. And my response to what I've been reading about in the paper, the kind of books that we have to not be able to read to the children. And we were reading all kinds of things magazines, and my children enjoyed reading so much. And now, my concern is that they're not going to get a chance to look at some of those books, even as second graders, going right up. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that question because while you guys are bracing yourself for what the election cycle means, what it's going to look like, you're going to hear a lot about critical race theory. I can tell you that that is not anything that is taught in K-12 academia and any state, and especially not here in the state of Connecticut. I taught, at Kennedy High School, I taught U.S. history. I taught African American history. It is this idea that whenever you mention race, that it is divisive. We are a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, multinational country with so many people from so many parts of the world that make so many contributions. In this country, African Americans played a significant role in building this country. Part of that journey includes some very painful history. We are doing a disservice to our children if we send them out in the world having never learned that history. Because the thing is, while that history is painful, if you stick with it and go to the continuum, you realize what we've accomplished and how far we've come. When I used to teach about slavery in Wyvern Public Schools to a majority-minority group of students, they didn't get angry, they got sad. That was the overwhelming sense of sadness. And my response, okay, well, what can we do about that? How do we change that? So this idea to never expose kids to that. The first year I taught African American history, the majority of my students were black students. I went to the board, I asked, can I teach this class? It was on the books, nobody was teaching it. I had to get parents to sign kids up for the class. By the 5th year, the majority of my students in that class were white, who just wanted to learn. I mean, I was a really good teacher. Kids wanted to be in my class, but they also wanted the opportunity to ask the questions that they had in a space that was safe.
Yes.
And where they would not be seen as being this or mean or spiteful for asking a question that they just wanted deeper understanding to. We are in this is a dangerous path we're going down. It is so incredibly dangerous because it is, when people say to me, actually in Congress, one of the big arguments is, the founders and the framers, and this is what they wanted. And I have to believe that the men who came together, the white men who came together in Philadelphia and drafted these documents, did the same thing that we do every day in Congress. What can we get past right now? Let's collaborate and come to the middle on what we can get past right now. I refuse to believe that when those men sat there, they said, and we don't ever want this to be changed because this is gospel. And I know that to be the case because they added the most beautiful provision in the Constitution which says it can be amended.
Yes.
So over time, as communities change, as things change, they said, we are creating a mechanism by which future generations can come back together and say, this is something we need to revisit. I refuse to believe that when those men wrote that document that said, I don't count as a person, and my great-grandfather counted as 3/5 of a person, that they said, and this is how we want this to be forever. I refuse to believe that. But I think where the problem lies, and I know you're like, I asked about children's books. I think where the problem lies is by saying that, people feel like that there's somehow I'm responsible for the problem. Nobody living today is responsible for the problems of 250 years ago in this country. But we all can be a part of the solution. So I think that there's this idea of, I hate the term white privilege, because there are so many things where people say, I had nothing to do with this. I was born just like this, and I grew up in a system that was already established. This week is Black Maternal Health Week, month. This month is Black Maternal Health Week. And someone on my social media, why does everything with you have to be black? Why are you making this an issue? All maternal health is important. Because Black women are disproportionately affected and die giving childbirth in this country. While the rate for white women is about 17 for every 100,000 births, for black women it's 43. For everyone, 3 times almost as much, because of lack of access to health care, because of poor prenatal care, because of medical professionals not taking their concerns and their pain seriously. So for this group, this is a very specific thing that happens to be associated with the color of their skin. If we can't even say that, then we can't fix it. At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things that I introduced a resolution in Congress that racism was a public health crisis. So here she goes, I was like, no, calm down. Because if you read through the resolution, it was, at the beginning of this pandemic, the communities that were the hardest hit were communities of color. When we started to look at why, it was because they did not have access to primary care physicians. When the first pop-up, if you remember, vaccination and test sites, they were at Rensselaer Field, clear across the state. So you have people in these urban areas who are walking around with COVID and dying because they don't have access to a test site or they don't have primary care insurance. You have people with comorbidities and pre-existing conditions just from generations of inequities in healthcare. So when you looked at the medical data from the CDC and the communities that were most affected, it was clear that because of housing issues, because of healthcare issues, because of nutrition issues, there was a population in this country that was disproportionately dying from COVID. So that I agree with. However, this idea that we are a monolith and there is only one version of history. No, I think our diversity is our strength. The fact that we have all these people who get to maintain their identity and still live in the same place and work together because we share the same values, I think is probably the most beautiful part of this story. You know, someone said to me in 2018, you'll never get elected in this district because it's a majority white district and there's not enough blacks, so there's enough teachers.
Are you hearing people work on or be concerned with long-haul COVID?
Yes, to your question. We have legislation to address what that means, and part of the challenge is, so when we passed the fiscal year 22-23 budget last month, one of the holdouts was our Republican colleagues they said COVID is over. We need to stop worrying about COVID. They didn't want to, and you probably read about this, any additional funding for COVID, and part of what we said was, we don't know what the long-term outcome is. First of all, for school-age children, we have no idea. Our kids were out of school for so long, then they came back. We don't know long-term what that looks like. My son was in 6th grade when the pandemic began. Started the school year regular. By March, all of the schools shut down. So went virtual for the remainder of 6th grade year. 7th grade was completely virtual all year. His school closed down. He started at another school for 8th grade, which started hybrid and then went to full in-person, but then we had a spike and all the variants, and they were in, out. He's in 8th grade, having only been in middle school in person for 7 months. I know, just because I know, that when his cohort of students hits middle school, high school, they're not going to be ready. So we're going to need more, not less, social workers, guidance counselors, nurses, aides, paraprofessionals. We see people who have unattributed memory loss. My husband got COVID very early in the pandemic. He's fit. He's a nice guy, you know? He is. I say that because he works out all the time, but when he goes up and down the stairs now, he tells me, my body is just different. He said to me, he used the term, my body's betraying me. He was like, I don't understand. I'm doing everything I did before. So we don't know the long-term effects. So this idea idea that it's over, stop thinking about it, stop throwing money at it. We have to put the resources where they belong until we know what the outcome is. And when people talk about, government is spending, you're doing this, it's your money. The United States government doesn't make anything, doesn't sell anything, they collect taxes and put it into government programs, government spending. So if I can't fight to bring money back to this district, where in the state of Connecticut, we get 74 cents on every dollar that we send. So we get less back than we send to the federal government. And I have some of my Republican colleagues who get $2 and $3 for every dollar that they send tell me that Connecticut's a blue welfare state. Are you serious? Are you, people don't understand how it works. It kills me when people talk, people are going to Florida and they're moving out of the state of Connecticut, but they stay here to work because they want the benefits, the safety, the protection, the pension, the retirement. Yeah, it's nice when you can go retire in a low-income state after you've worked in a state that paid you what you were worth. I'm not teaching in the state of Florida. And I say that just because when people, these very superficial conversations about how these things work and what it means. So right now, that's what we're fighting for, to make sure that the resources are in place until we are sure that we know all of the effects of long-haul COVID and that we have a better pandemic response should something like this happen again, but also preventative care so that something like this won't happen. We have to invest in research and development and infusing the pipeline for healthcare systems and just all of these things that I fear that there's this level of exhaustion because of everything that happened with COVID that people just want to throw their hands up. But no, the government has to sustain through the difficult times, the transition times, the easier times. It's work, and we have to just keep working. So yes, there is legislation to address long COVID, to begin to document the symptoms, because I've seen 2 people have COVID and they have very different symptoms, very different outcomes, very different reactions, but it's not over yet.
They first started talking on Fox News that this critical race theory was being taught. We knew it was a lie. And most people said, this will go nowhere. And yet they kept at it, and we kind of said, well, it'll die out on its own. And it didn't. And right now, it is really disruptive to school systems throughout Connecticut and throughout the nation. What could we have done different 2 years ago when they first started talking?
This idea that it was a lie. We should have called it a lie. Right. We use all of these flowery words and terms to dance around. This is a flat-out lie. We spent way too much time, first of all, thinking it would go away, which is, it just gave it the energy and the momentum to fester. You're going to hear this over and over and over again. And even now, I struggle every day because I'm like, do I engage in this campaign right now? Do I respond to all of these attacks that are coming my way? And it is a conscious decision. No, today I legislate. Today I'm going to do my work. But you know how hard it is to bite your tongue when you know something is wrong and it's coming at you from every angle. But I'm like, I cannot be distracted from the work that I'm trying to do to keep responding to the nonsense. So what should we have done? Not recede very early on. We should have been, and the other thing that I think is going to be even more important when we talk about critical race theory or have these conversations about race and what it means and how we move forward, it can't just be the black people saying it. I asked my colleagues on a call, how do you guys respond to all the threats that come into your office? What do you do? Who do you reach out to? Who do you talk to? What has your office done, make sure that you and your staff are safe? And my colleagues were like, I don't understand what you mean. We don't get threats like that.
Wow.
I was like, what? If you could hear some of the things that come, the calls, the emails, some of the things that the hate that comes into my office, it is listen to me, I thank God every day that I knew who I was before I went to Congress. Because if I was looking for who I was when I got there, I would have never found it. Because the people on the other end of that line, when they tell me who I am and what I represent and what my values are, initially I was like, no, can we just meet? Because you just don't know me. I want to tell you who I am and what, you'll appreciate that, we care about the same issues and we want the same things for our families. And I learned very quickly, no, they just hate me. It doesn't matter about the issues. It doesn't matter what I said. It doesn't matter when I tell them I just passed legislation for veterans that will directly help your family. They don't care about that. And I've learned it over and over and over again. There is a community of people who have drawn a line in the sand and put their flags down and decided that if any other person is helping this country, it will diminish the role that my family has and that I have. And for as much as I can say, no, that's not what it is. Everybody, this is what we do. There are people, the calls I get, the threats that come to my office. And that lets me know that if someone was thinking about this role, like there are a lot of people who are like, you know what, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to be bothered with that. But somebody has to do it. So, I thank you for your time. I thank you for coming. I miss you guys. I predict that it is going to get nasty moving forward, but I also know the only person who I can control is myself. So if I make the conscious decision to not engage in that way, then maybe the next person will do it, and the next person will do it, and the next person will do it. But I can't be concerned about how other people conduct themselves in an election. I can promise you that I will run my campaign and work for this seat with the respect and the dignity that this office requires. Thank you.